There are moments in life that seem so ordinary at first until one night you realize how significant they truly are. When Eddie, Carl's son from his first marriage, came back home, I never imagined everything would change. And yet here I am now, sitting in the dim light of my bedroom, still trying to catch my breath as I recount this story. When Eddie returned, he claimed it was to improve his night photography skills, city lights, bustling streets, panoramic views. It all seemed like an excuse. Looking back on that night now, I've realized that his true reason for coming back wasn't any of those things, it was me. But at the time, I couldn't even begin to comprehend that truth. Carl, my husband, had to leave for a business trip that day. The fact that Eddie and I would be left alone for a few days didn't seem like a big deal at the time, but little did I know how complicated and dangerous those days could be. When Eddie walked through the door, something inside me shifted. The young boy who had left 4 years ago was gone, replaced by a confident, charismatic, and undeniably attractive young man. His steady gaze and easy demeanor stirred something within me that I couldn't quite name. It was the night after Eddie returned. Carl had already gone to bed, and I was in the kitchen putting away dishes. Suddenly, Eddie's voice broke the silence, making me jump slightly as he spoke softly from behind me. "Angela," he said, his tone firm yet gentle, and it froze me in place. "You've helped me a lot today. Showing me around the city's photography spots was amazing, but that's not the only thing I wanted to thank you for." I took a deep breath, trying to steady the sudden rush of nerves. "What do you mean, Eddie?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. Eddie stepped closer, his breath now warm on my neck. "What I really want to thank you for," he said, his voice low and deliberate, "is inspiring me. You've reignited something in me, Angela." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning, leaving me breathless. My hands trembled as I stood at the sink, unsure of what to say or do. But in that moment, under the dim kitchen light, something undeniable sparked between us, and that's where everything changed. If you're intrigued so far, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications to catch the rest of this story. Don't forget to share your thoughts and show your support with likes and comments. The next morning, we sat around the breakfast table. Carl was packing his bag while chatting about his work plans. Eddie, meanwhile, sat casually at the head of the table, stirring his coffee. His calm demeanor betrayed the fact that whatever had happened in the kitchen last night wasn't one-sided. Though he often avoided looking directly at me, every glance he stole carried a weight that I couldn't ignore. Carl's voice pulled me from my thoughts. "Eddie, are you heading out to shoot again tonight? Angela was a big help yesterday, wasn't she?" he asked with a small smile. Eddie's lips curved. Led into a slight grin, he answered, "Yes, Angela's guidance was incredible. If it weren't for her knowledge of the city, I'd never have captured such amazing shots," he said, his tone warm. Carl nodded in agreement and turned to me. "Angela, I'll be out of town today. Keep an eye on Eddie, would you? He's been away for 4 years, and photography means the world to him." "We're lucky to have your help," he said with a chuckle. Then, looking back at Eddie, he added, "Who knows, maybe you'll make a fortune off this someday, right, Eddie?" Eddie's smile widened slightly, though he kept his gaze on the table. "I hope so, Dad," he said calmly. But then his eyes met mine, and my heart skipped a beat. A wave of uneasiness settled in my chest as Carl's words echoed in my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that Eddie's true reason for returning wasn't as simple as photography. Maybe Carl was right, maybe Eddie was just here to focus on his work, but a part of me struggled to believe that. After breakfast, Carl stood by the door with his bag in hand, ready to leave. He turned to me one last time. "Angela, take care of Eddie, will you? Make something nice for dinner tonight. He'll need the energy before his shoot," he said with a smile. I nodded, even as the tension inside me grew. Once Carl left, the quiet of the house felt heavier than usual, almost suffocating. Later that evening, Eddie and I were standing on a hill overlooking the city, its streets lit up like a sea of stars. He was busy with his camera, adjusting the settings and capturing the glowing scene. I was lost in thought, staring at the vibrant lights below when his voice pulled me back. "Angela," he said, his tone serious and deliberate, catching me off guard. He lowered his camera and turned to look directly at me. "If it weren't for you, coming back here wouldn't have meant anything." His words were so direct and clear that I was momentarily speechless. I took a deep breath and turned my gaze back to the city, trying to make sense of the emotions swirling inside me. But as each second passed, it became harder and harder to ignore the feelings I was trying to suppress. When the shoot was over, we headed home. The drive back was quiet, but the air between us was thick with unspoken tension. As soon as we stepped inside and closed the door, the silence of the house amplified the intensity between us. Eddie turned around to face me, closing the distance between us with a determined look in his eyes. "Angela," he said softly, this time his voice almost tender, "you're trying to pretend this isn't happening, but we both feel it, don't we?" His words stole the breath from my lungs, and my heart began to race. I wanted to escape, to break this tension, but my body wouldn't move. Eddie stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. The space between us disappeared. "This isn't right," I whispered, though the hesitation in my voice betrayed me. The determination and desire in his gaze had me completely under his spell. This night was about to become the moment where everything began to change. Eddie's approach had caught me completely off guard. The silence hung between us for what felt like an eternity before he broke it with a gentle smile, taking one more step toward me. "Angela, you seem a little tense," he said, his voice light and warm. "How about we have a drink, relax a bit, and talk? It's been so long since we've really caught up." I hesitated. Every instinct screamed at me to walk away, to put some distance between us, but another part of me wanted to stay and see where this would lead. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice shaky. Eddie's reassuring smile deepened. "Of course. And besides," he said, walking toward the kitchen, "I think we're at a point where we can actually share things now. You're 40, I'm 24. This age gap shouldn't stop us from connecting, should it?" His words left me momentarily stunned. He carried himself with such confidence, such ease, that it was hard not to get drawn in. A few minutes later, he returned with 2 glasses of wine, handing one to me. He met my gaze directly. "Angela," he said, as if wanting to make things perfectly clear, "you've known me since I was a kid, but I'm not a kid anymore. I think it's time you realize that." That statement echoed inside me, stirring something I hadn't fully acknowledged. I had no choice but to confront the reality that Eddie wasn't a child anymore. I took a sip of my wine, my eyes meeting his once more. The intensity in his gaze, the quiet confidence he exuded, it was impossible not to be affected. Eddie skillfully steered the conversation, seamlessly moving from old memories to the present with every compliment. "Angela, you've always been a beautiful woman, but now it's like you've become even more captivating with age. How do you manage to look this incredible?" he asked, his gaze lingering on me in a way that made my heart race and my cheeks flush. The second glass of wine had loosened me up considerably. Eddie's warm, genuine demeanor had a way of disarming me. It had been so long since I'd had such an open and easy conversation. The tension I'd been carrying all evening slowly gave way to a strange sense of comfort. Finally, Eddie leaned back slightly, setting his glass down on the table. His eyes locked onto mine, his expression serious but soft. "Angela, I'm going to ask you for something big," he said, his voice slower and more deliberate than usual. I tilted my head, curiosity mixed with a hint of nervousness. "What kind of big thing?" I asked. Eddie reached behind him and pulled out a small black box, placing it on the table. He opened it carefully, revealing a stunning black dress. It was sleeveless, with a daring neckline and a sleek, figure-hugging design. The fabric gleamed under the light, its elegance undeniable. "I want you to wear this," he said, his tone firm yet gentle. "I want to take photos of you while I'm capturing the beauty of this city's lights and charm. I want you to be part of the frame. Beauty, it's like natural art, Angela. And I can't ignore it." His words left me stunned as I held the dress in my hands, feeling the soft fabric beneath my fingers. I glanced up at him, unsure what to say. Eddie's eyes were earnest, silently pleading with me. "Please, Angela," he murmured, almost whispering. "Don't say no." It seemed like such an innocent request, and a part of me wanted to believe it was. I decided to give in, thinking that after Eddie got the photos he wanted, I'd reflect on this strange, exciting moment while lying in bed later that night. But little did I know the events that would unfold when we returned home were far beyond anything I could have imagined. Eddie's gesture and his words had left me both surprised and unexpectedly excited. I glanced at the dress, running my fingers over its luxurious material. "Eddie, do you think this will even fit me?" I asked, half skeptical, half shy. A small smile played on Eddie's lips, one that carried both sincerity and a quiet confidence. "Of course it will," he replied calmly. "I got it in your size. I even looked through your wardrobe to figure out what size you wear." His words made my heart race, realizing how attentive and thoughtful he had been stirred something in me, something I couldn't quite put into words. "You looked in my wardrobe?" I asked, my voice a mix of surprise and faint excitement. Eddie shrugged lightly. "Yeah, but only to make sure I got it just right. I wanted this night to feel special." I took another sip of wine, the slight buzz I was feeling easing the tension in the room. "All right," I said at last, smiling faintly. "I'll give it a try, but I have to say this is a pretty bold choice." He chuckled softly. "Exactly, and you're just as bold and striking as this dress, Angela." As I put on the dress in the room, I caught my reflection in the mirror. The dress fit me perfectly, hugging my body and accentuating my curves. There was something about it that made me feel a spark of youthful energy I hadn't felt in years. I stood there for a few seconds, staring at myself, then took a deep breath and stepped out. When Eddie saw me, he froze for a moment, his eyes fixed on me, not looking away even for a second. "Just as I thought, you look incredible," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, yet every word was laced with admiration and passion. Before long, we were driving through the quieter streets of the city. It was clear from Eddie's demeanor that he had specific shots in mind. When the car stopped, he turned to me, his face lit up with excitement. "Come on, let's take a walk. The lights here are perfect," he said, his voice full of enthusiasm. As we stepped onto the street, the cool air wrapped around us, but it didn't bother me. Eddie walked beside me, holding his camera in one hand while his other hand rested lightly on my lower back, guiding me. "Stop," he said suddenly, his tone sharp with focus. "Right here, the light is amazing. Don't move." I fixed my gaze ahead, focusing on his words, and smiled softly. As I stood still, the clicking of his camera filled the silence around us. Eddie shot me from different angles, occasionally lowering the camera to look directly at me. "How do you stay so natural, Angela? You're truly stunning," he said, his voice full of genuine admiration. We slowly moved toward a darker part of the street. At one point, I stumbled slightly, and Eddie's grip on my waist tightened, steadying me. "Careful," he said, his tone protective. The warmth of his hand on my back sent a shiver through me, but it also made me feel safe. Later, we stopped near a small wall. "Stand here, please," Eddie said, his tone gentle but firm. "The light here will make you look absolutely amazing." When he noticed a flicker of hesitation in my eyes, he added, "Just be yourself. I want to capture you in the best way possible." At one point, as we walked, I tripped again, and Eddie caught me instantly. For a moment, I was leaning entirely against him. Our eyes met, and there was an unspoken energy between us that neither of us could deny. We didn't say a word, but the intensity of that moment was palpable. By the end of the night, as we made our way back to the car, exhaustion began to take over. Struggling to keep my balance, I leaned closer to Eddie, resting my head on his shoulder. "Thank you for everything tonight, Eddie," I whispered. Eddie smiled softly, wrapping his arm around my shoulder to support me. "It was amazing for me, Angela. Sharing this moment with you is something I'll never forget." As we drove home, neither of us said much, but the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was filled with the weight of everything unspoken between us. The city lights filtered through the car windows, casting fleeting shadows, and my mind was swirling with thoughts about the night. There was both a peace and a sense of chaos inside me. Being this close to Eddie had stirred feelings I hadn't expected. When we pulled up to the house, I knew things had already shifted between us. Back at the house, Eddie gently guided me inside. Between the alcohol and the exhaustion, I was struggling to stay steady on my feet. His hand stayed on my back as he supported me. "Let me help you upstairs," he said softly. "Sit here and I'll get you something," he said, but I reached out and placed my hand on his arm, stopping him. When Eddie turned to me, his expression was hard to read. There was surprise but also a flicker of concern. With the courage that came from the alcohol, I suddenly leaned forward and pressed my lips to his. The kiss was brief but intense. When I pulled back, I saw both surprise and deep desire in Eddie's eyes. "Angela," he murmured, his voice barely audible but laced with a tone that carried everything he wasn't saying. "I actually came back for you. That's why I'm here." His confession ignited every bit of turmoil inside me. At that moment, every thought in my mind vanished. Staring at Eddie, I felt completely drawn into his pull. With a faint smile, I asked, "You've seen enough of the dress, haven't you?" My tone carried a hint of playful defiance. Eddie nodded slowly, never breaking eye contact. My hands reached for the straps of the dress on my shoulders, sliding them down slowly. The dress slipped to the floor like silk, pooling around my feet, leaving me completely exposed under his gaze. Eddie's breathing quickened, and in the silence of the room, the only sound was the pounding of our hearts. Eddie began to undress as well, slowly removing his shirt and letting it fall to the ground. My eyes trailed over his mature, strong frame, taking in every detail. When he finally dropped his pants, the last barrier between us disappeared. In that moment, it was just the two of us, time and place, none of it mattered anymore. I leaned back slowly, letting my body sink into the bed, my eyes never leaving his. "Come," I whispered, my voice soft but clear. Eddie approached without a moment's hesitation. He leaned over me, his face close to mine as his hands gripped the mattress at my sides. Our breaths were mingling, the tension between us palpable. In that moment, everything felt surreal, but at the same time, it felt completely right. As Eddie's warmth spread throughout my body, I surrendered completely to the power of this moment. Even drunk, I was more sober than I had ever been when I first felt Eddie inside me. As this was happening, I could see the happiness in Eddie's eyes. He had been waiting for this moment for years, and he was panting. I put my hand on his heart and said, "Eddie, I'm with you, and everything is beautiful." I was looking at Eddie, standing right above me with red cheeks and messy hair. Eddie continued breathlessly. I pressed my hand over Eddie's heart as my legs contracted and I trembled. It hurt, but I could see that he was enjoying it when the traces of my nails were there. Eddie kissed my hand and let himself go. I couldn't have guessed that this action of mine would affect him so much. Eddie gently lay down beside me, resting his head on my chest. His breath lightly grazed my neck, sending a shiver through me. "Angela," he said, his voice soft but filled with a deep intensity. "I came back for you. You need to understand that you're everything to me." The last thing I remembered was the warmth of Eddie's kiss on my face, and his whispered words, "I'm so glad you're here." My eyes grew heavy, my body relaxed, and in that moment, free from all the chaos, wrapped in the serenity of just the two of us, I drifted off to sleep. What happened after that night was even more thrilling. I knew that moment wasn't the end, it was just the beginning. The turmoil and desire inside me would only grow stronger in the days to come, but those are stories for another time. See you in the next chapter of this tale. Thank you for listening so far. Remember, the most exciting moments are still ahead. Stay tuned. If you've made it this far, I know my story has touched you deeply. There's so much more to share, and you won't want to miss it. Don't miss any of it. Don't forget to hit the follow button, turn on notifications, and leave your thoughts in the comments.